So, Tom, I thought I'd start with this whole little situation going on. I had not read much about this. So, PSPP, so Paul St-Pierre Plamondon, calling out Francois Legault to, what does he say, drop his, quote, unhealthy defeatism on independence. What is this about?
Well, this is PSPP having far too much fun with former separatist Francois Legault. What you have to know about Legault is that when he was in the Parti Québécois, Aaron, I was in the House when this guy arrived. I mean, he was supposed to be their big savior because for the first time they had a decent credentialed businessman as part of their caucus. He was abysmal when he arrived. He quickly took lessons to learn how to speak in the House, but he was a bit full of himself. And he used to always tell the other Péquistes who had spent their whole lives working for Quebec sovereignty that he was the real deal. He was much more of a separatist than they were, and he was in more of a hurry than they were. So when he finally dropped that facade and decided that he was going to put together this coalition of people who were in favor of Quebec what? Autonomy, not necessarily independence, and he was going to work for that. You remember, we've talked about it before, this famous interview he gave in Actualité magazine before the 2018 campaign. He's going after powers in what? He's going after powers in culture, he's going after powers in language, and most importantly in this discussion, going after powers in immigration, especially the family reunification part of it. He last week, if you read my article last week in the Gazette, you saw me predict that Legault was going for a referendum on autonomy. Back in 1998, when the Supreme Court ruled on separation, they said, clear answer to a clear question, clear majority, you have to negotiate. But that doesn't only apply to a negotiation on secession. That applies to any clear mandate from the people of a province to their government to negotiate a constitutional change. And this is where I see the committee that he struck the week before as being a bit of a setup. He's going to have these people come back and tell him what he wants to hear.
Exactly.
He should have more powers. He should have a referendum. Now, every time he talks about that, and he talked about it in several interviews yesterday, Legault goes out of his way to say what a terrible waste of time another referendum on independence would be. A third losing referendum on independence would be a tragedy and a travesty, and that's why it would be a big mistake to go down that road. This, of course, sets Paul St-Pierre Plamondon, the head of the PQ's, hair on fire. He goes nuts and says, don't you dare say that it's not a good idea to have another referendum on separation. That's the only thing I've got going into the next election. So he wants to have that fight with Legault, and Legault's more than willing to have it because Legault knows that only 33% of Quebecers would ever vote for separation, pure and simple. So he's trying to crab walk towards some sort of simile separation in the form of more powers. And you know what? If he does that referendum, I would love to see who the No Committee is going to be comprised of, because you can see guys like Keith Henderson and some of his friends in there on the No Committee. And who else is going to be in there? Paul St-Pierre Plamondon of the Parti Québécois in the No Committee. I would do, and I'll buy popcorn to watch those meetings take place.
So, yelling from the other corner at Francois Legault today, beyond PSPP, is Mark Miller, of course, our federal immigration minister.
Well, it's about high time, because Miller is one of the smartest people in cabinet. When Trudeau came out of his meeting 8 days ago with Legault, Trudeau said something that was extraordinarily important. He said most of the temporary immigrants in Quebec were chosen or approved by Quebec, right, which is true. And by the way, Quebec has more powers than any other province in immigration, especially on temporary immigration. And this goes all the way back to deals signed between Bourassa and Mulroney in the wake of the failure of the Meech Lake Accords. So and Quebec doesn't even use the powers that it have, and yet it's whining about more. And Legault goes further. It's the same thing he does on language, Aaron. He says, French is in terrible shape. French is in dire straits, real danger for the French language in Montreal, which is hokum. If you read the reports by the real experts, and Legault is not one of them, they say, no, it's just not true. There's never been a higher percentage of people who can hold a conversation in French in Montreal. So this is just baloney what he's spinning. But he spins it for political purposes. He had the temerity to say that 100% of the housing problem was caused by temporary immigrants. If you go to the Gaspé, there's no housing available. That's not the fault of immigrants. There are hardly any immigrants there. The same thing if you go out in the upper St. Maurice region. Lots of regions of Quebec have no housing because there's been bad planning, nothing available, has nothing whatsoever to do with immigrants. And the temporary immigrants, many of them work on the farms, live there. And it's just, It's just a way of attacking immigrants the same way Jean Boulet did in the last campaign. This is the bottom line with François Legault and his government. They're shamelessly attacking minorities with Bill 21, shamelessly attacking immigrants with this type of outburst. And Mark Miller had the sense, the decency, and the vocabulary to go after Legault. And good for him. It's high time somebody took this guy on. He wouldn't be doing it unless his old friend, Justin Trudeau, had said, go after him. It's just too much. And it is too much. He's making up facts. It is a fact-free zone whenever François Legault goes after one of these subjects, but he's going after emotions, not facts. And you know what? He's hoping to claw his way back by showing that he can go after minorities as much as the Parti Québécois does.
So I want to play. You just brought up something which sparked a memory for me. This idea that they're going to blame immigration, of course, in the areas like in the regions where it's not a problem. I brought this up last Friday when Jean-François Lisée, was on the show,
right?
And I asked about that because I've heard you say that, and I've heard others suggest the same thing. You can't blame immigration, certainly not for what's going on in some of these areas. Listen to what I asked him, and listen to his answer. How do you look at smaller towns outside of Montreal that have virtually no immigration but having a housing crisis anyway?
Well, more and more have immigration. In Gaspésie, they have a housing crisis because there are so many immigrants coming to work in the windmill factory. The owner of the McDonald's in Val d'Or, who had to buy a house to make a dormitory for Northern African workers coming there. So it is connected.
What do you think?
Well, let's start with the most obvious thing. Get back to what I was mentioning at the outset. François Legault's CAQ government chose most of those people, gave them permission to come here, and selected them and approved them. So that's the first thing. So you can't blame François Legault, cannot blame the immigrants for that. With regard to the numbers, there's a really great piece by Michel Auger and in the La Presse newspaper last week that just knocks down completely the argument of François Lisée. It's just not true that those regions have a housing crisis because one or two places actually hire people who are here on temporary permits. That's not the cause of their housing problems. That's not true.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. I want to kind of clear up if we can. I'm not sure it's possible to clear this up. It just seems so muddy. The McGill encampment, we had McGill issue a new statement today, that the crux of it being that, you know what, it's enough. We're cutting off all communications. There will be no more negotiations with the encampment, with the protesters there. And then follows up by the protesters saying, we're not leaving. So I don't know if you heard any of the press conference this morning held by Montreal Police trying to explain why they haven't done anything here yet. There's a theory, Anthony Housefather on earlier, suggesting the police are waiting for the mayor to give them the go-ahead. The city's saying, no, they don't need our go-ahead. What's going on here, Tom, and has anything changed, even with this McGill statement?
Well, this is an important change in attitude by the administration at McGill University. And having had more than one occasion to criticize their lack of action and their hand-wringing and their inability to do anything, I think it's about time that they said, okay, no, we're not negotiating with you. I don't know if they ever should have in the first place, but they put down a number of things that they said that they're a part of what they're thinking is. They're going to look at their investments. Are they going to invest in companies that manufacture arms, things like that? That's just a fresh and smart review of what they're doing on an ethical basis. That's fine. But they're also telling them, you're here illegally and we're going to act accordingly. Now, I think that Anthony Housefather is onto something there. It is absolutely unacceptable that the police have done nothing about any of this, except the one time that they actually broke into a building. When you're hanging effigies of an Israeli leader and you're saying that you're going to be holding a camp and the advertising has somebody with a machine gun and this is going to be to train youth. I mean, the messages there are full of hate. And there's no way around it anymore. So McGill did the right thing to shut down the discussions and say, okay, this circus is over. Now the question becomes, when are they going to be able to get the campus back? Because as they correctly say, this is private property and they're not allowed to be here. Why has the police done nothing? They don't have to wait for anything from City Hall. In fact, it's just the opposite. City Hall doesn't have any orders to give to its police. But I do think that the current leadership of the Montreal Police and the current leadership of City Hall, i.e. Valérie Plante, are of one mind about this. They tend to lean much more towards the people who are illegally occupying McGill than otherwise. And I think that that's the number one thing to explain their inaction.
Is this ideology then? Is that what this is about? With respect to the city administration?
Yeah. I mean, go right back. There was a deplorable speech being given by a self-styled imam, and we had the person in charge of getting rid of racism at City Hall who was one of the people, enthusiastically in the crowd. So, yeah. And Valerie Plante said, "Oh, you better not do that." She said, "Well, I'm going to have to make a difference between my inner voice and my outer voice from now on." But I think that said all that needed to be said, frankly.
So what's the play here? The city continues to say nothing. I know Alain Vaillancourt was asked about this in council yesterday by an opposition member, but the mayor has said nothing. What do you imagine the play here is? Is this a matter of just days now before this gets taken down, do you think?
Well, we do know that the city's going back to court next week. Next month, not next week. I wish it was next week.
End of next month, though, right? Towards the end of the month, I think.
Yeah, it's far too long. But that's also to get the injunction, which would make it easier to say that they're in contempt of court. But that's a long, drawn-out process. That's the process that McGill decided to start.
Right.
There were two students who used their own technique, which completely failed. Then McGill completely failed. The judge basically saying, you're here saying that it's an immediate danger and you can't have your commencement, but you've already booked your commencement into the Bell Center, so what the heck are you talking about? And what are the names of these people? You can't even give me anything. So it was a fail. And so they were sent packing, but it doesn't mean that it's not illegal. It clearly is. And the police, of course, should be moving in. When the person who owns the property says, people are occupying my property illegally, please remove them, the normal course of action is to say, that's against the law, we're going to act. But the City Hall under Valerie Plante has not shown the slightest inclination. And I think that those signals get picked up, whether they're direct or indirect.
All right. Tom, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again later
in
in the week.
Aaron.